Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for March of 2021. We have 11 records to talk about today. This month was stacked with releases. Stuff that I was really excited for, stuff that piqued my curiosity, stuff that friends were keeping on their cycles that piqued my interest. Just generally a lot of stuff going around, and I'm going to be talking about all the releases today. So let's just get to it. One of rock's most consistent, prolific bands, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, dropped another record this year, and it is another entry into their microtonal series, something that started with Flying Microtonal Banana and was continued on last year's KG, but also acts as a companion to KG as its title kind of completes the KGLW title of the band, and also again just has them doing more microtonal stuff. So they're just it's a companion record to a record that I already thought was really solid at expanding on those microtonal sounds with some cool genre experiments, and while having some of those classic King Gizzard feeling tracks. This is more of that in spades. You know, they have a lot of the traditional King Gizzard stuff with some more prog style drum work like on Pleura or Atraxia, two incredibly tight rock jams that have some cool riff work in them. You have more ambient driven stuff like the 1-2 punch of Supreme Ascendancy and Static Electricity, with East-West Link sort of bridging it even more while having some of those heavier riff work come in. I like the sonic experiments as well on tracks like the opener, If Not Now Then When, which sees them infusing some of that boogie rock that they toyed with on Fishing for Fishes in this microtonal style, and continuing that a little bit with some of the organ work on the following track, ONE. And its closer, KGLW, sees them dipping more into that heavy realm, something that I'm so happy to see with this 8-minute doom metal barn burner that has some heavy, beefy sounding riffs with that microtonal sound that really gives it this foreboding tone. You know, I like this record a lot. I feel like there's some moments where it sort of dips. Like, I don't necessarily like the kinetic groove on See Me quite like I like the kinetic groove on the electronic tinge track from KG, but I like that they're still finding ways to adapt this microtonal sound into something still compelling to listen to as a fan of this band. I'm sure maybe somebody in the comments is wondering, have I thought about doing Redacted on KG and LW? You're goddamn right I have been, because I like the idea of Redacted, and they're two companion records, so of course I've thought about redacting them. Will I? Maybe someday, but I got a lot of ideas for that show, so we'll see where this falls down the line. But even without thinking of Redacteds in mind, this is a really tight rock record, and I feel like if you like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, if you like their microtonal stuff that they've done so far, you'll probably like a lot of the more straightforward King Gizzard style tracks, and could appreciate some of the experiments if you've liked some of their less than normal stuff that they've done over the last couple of years. I like that while this band continues to be prolific, they not only find ways to call back to older records, but they do it in a way that still fits in line with what their current experiment is. I also like a lot of their songwriting. They do a good job at creating a picture that fits a lot of that microtonal soundscape incredibly well. These guys are just a talented batch of musicians that know how to write some really good riffs, have some cool solo work with some tight drum play woven underneath that. It's solid as fuck. I like it about as much as KG, so I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I was encroaching on an 8, but to be honest, some of the ambient stuff I don't fuck with quite as much as the more kinetic stuff, and even some of the kinetic stuff doesn't match up to some of the kinetic stuff that I've liked on records in the past. But it's still a very solid record. Long-term problem, can I learn to love these To put it lightly, I was not excited for this A Day to Remember record. While I thought Bad Vibrations was a step down in quality from Common Courtesy and really most of their career at large, I didn't think they would have followed it up with something quite this bad. But when Degenerates came out, I had lost all hope for this project being good. Because you could write off Degenerates as one bad single on a potentially solid project. But then every subsequent single and delay upon delay upon delay that this record was facing, it just kept painting this foreboding picture of poor quality. And now that it's finally here, it certainly is the overproduced, lazily written, poorly constructed attempt at pop from a band that was the last of a style that I really sunk my teeth into in my high school years. I hate this record. Even for the parts that I enjoy, some of those attributes that I already talked about weigh those tracks down. The production on this project is a mess. Everything feels like it's competing with each other, especially the drums and the guitars. They feel way too overproduced, and Jeremy's vocals feel like they're trying to slice their way through the mix and hit your ears. There's moments where, when it's not being as bombastic, where you can sort of, it feels a little more clear, but those are the moments where they're either really aiming for some shallow emotional resonance, or they're cashing in on some other pop sounds that just don't work for them. Before I get into a lot of the parts I don't like, I will talk about what I do enjoy from this project. One of the singles to drop from this before it came out that I think is a moderate song, it's a decent track, the opener, Brick Wall. I feel like it sets the stage for the record, or at least gives the record some decent footing to start on. You know, the whole sound of the track, the whirlwind nature of it, I feel like sounds alright. You know, and I enjoy, the one heavy moment that I enjoy comes from Resentment. The breakdown on that actually got me a little squint-faced. It wasn't terrible. But really, that's about all I got. I mean, whether it's the very flaccid, average-sounding tracks like Mind Reader, or their extension of Bad Vibrations Mediocrity into tracks like Last Chance to Dance, or the heavier sentiments on Fuck You Money, the sort of contradictory nature of having a track like Fuck You Money and Only Money appear on this project, a moment where the sincerity of Only Money is undercut heavily by the overall tone of Fuck You Money. The tracks where they really try to hit that pop realm, like Bloodsucker, or Viva La Mexico, or Degenerates, tracks that either try to be super poppy with that Marshmello collaboration, or that sort of groove in Bloodsucker that feels very millennial pop, or even, again, Viva La Mexico's just mess of a track that's trying to be this party pop rock song that I feel like falls flat on its face. This record has so many tropes that I've complained about other bands doing, as far as making something that feels very derivative, or feels like it's trying to trend chase, or just has the production that's cacophonously too much. This has all of those tropes that you've heard me talk about from other bands, but it's a day to remember doing it. One other weird attribute that I wanted to talk about was Jeremy's vocals in particular. While there's some parts on some of the average tracks where he just kind of sounds like he's riding on autopilot, on some of the more pop-leaning songs, he's trying to adorn this poppier presentation, and to me, it feels like sort of knockoff Ed Sheeran, and not in a complimentary fashion. It's a point that once it kind of hit my ear in that way, I couldn't not hear it, and to me that just sort of lessened the experience even farther for me.
The best example of that actually comes from the soft parts of Resentment. When that album isn't trying to get dense and heavy, the pop stuff sticks out like a sore thumb, and his voice has that Sheeran-esque quality that coats the track in a really negative way.
I like I said up at the top, I didn't have hopes for this project, but I also really didn't expect it to suck this much. For a band that I used to hold to a pretty solid sort of notoriety, this is a far cry from quality. I'm giving this a 1 out of 10. It's really, really that bad. Like, it's bottom tier. It's F tier material, in my opinion, for sure.
Questions, rules counting down. Better count me out, can't commit myself.
Rap rock group MAYDAY released their most recent record this month as well, Minute to Midnight, and it's a pretty solid batch of tracks. These guys are one of the more consistent artists within Strange's roster. IMO, I think Burns and Rec have some naturally well-developed chemistry. I think the band themselves are incredibly tight at their core. And while this record is a solid batch of tracks that have some, you know, general grooves you might associate with the group, what I like about this record is that it takes what would normally be a very summery vibe for them and reins it into more of a spring-like atmosphere. You know, I could see somebody throwing this on and cruising in the current month that we're in and really enjoy the vibes that you see, or that you're taking in. You know, while I think it takes a couple tracks to really get started, you know, the intro is fine. The title track really isn't one of my favorite tracks on here. But once the reggae groove on Make Noise settles and you really feel the vibe that they're going for, I feel like the record gets into a pretty good momentum. You know, I think tracks like See You Smile and Hard to Leave do a really good job at having some good emotional resonance and discussing, again, just love, significant others, all that sort of stuff, or just people that you care about. I feel like they bring the reggae groove back on Lost Cause incredibly well. I think the hook work on tracks like Golden Hour and Flowers is incredibly good. I love the overall metaphor in Flowers that's used in the track, talking about how you may be in it for so long and you want to see the fame, you want to see your success, but you still want to bask in it. You know what I mean? Bringing up age again in sort of the ticking clock on Get There is another, again, sort of carrying of that lyrical theme. And I enjoy the couple of ragers that are on here as well, like Flatline and the closer Foul Out, which do see them sort of picking up that energy a little more. The collaborations on here on Flowers and All In with Yubi from Cess Crew jumping in on that cut are really solid as well. They're really well constructed tracks. My biggest issue with this album as a whole more comes in the fact that it sort of has some of the typical to strange roster release material tropes, that it's a bit long in the tooth. It kind of has some tracks that I feel like extend the vibe a bit too unnecessarily. You know, while I do enjoy the laid-back vibe that a lot of this record has, I feel like it gets a little bloated. It's a little atonal throughout parts of the second and last leg of the record, you know, but a lot of what's here when it excels, I feel it excels pretty well, and even amidst its more bloated presentation, is a really good batch of tracks if you want some nice, laid-back rap rock to sink your teeth into. You know, Burns and Rek's chemistry is still really palpable. Rek himself has some great verses on this particular project, and yeah, I dig the vibe on this a lot. I feel like if you want a good, you know, batch of rap tracks to just coast to while we're amidst spring, you can't go wrong with this project. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10, to be honest. Shock rock icon Rob Zombie also dropped his latest record, and when I saw it was dropping, I wouldn't say I was excited, but I was morbidly curious, because I didn't like his last record all that much. The Electric Warlock, Acid Witch, Satanic Orgy Celebration Dispenser. I thought the best parts of that record were its interludes, if that tells you anything about how I felt about that project. And to be honest, while I love Hellbilly Deluxe, I wouldn't say a lot of Rob's post-Hellbilly Deluxe material is all that consistent. And his newest record, the Lunar Injection Kool-Aid Eclipse Conspiracy, is another album in that lane. I think it's hilarious how many interludes coat this thing, because while those are my favorite aspect of his last record, and some of them do make up some of the better highlights of this record, there are way too many of them. I enjoy the atmosphere on Expanding the Head of Zed and the synthesizers on Hovering Over the Dull Earth, but a brief static hum in the radio blared and Shower of Stones and even Serenity of Witches just feel like super unnecessary to a large degree. But amidst those interludes, I will say Rob has made some tracks as a whole that actually are better than what was on his last record. I think the actual opening track, the non-intro, interlude track, The Triumph of King Freak, is a nice stomper that gives me old zombie vibes. I think Shadow of the Cemetery Man has a good sort of melding of that with some of the ideas that he had on his last record, some of the synthetic tones or the sharper electronics. I feel like that are coded in that track come across incredibly well. And I think the eternal struggles of the Howling Man also feels like a good extension of classic zombie writing in a modern sense. Hell, I even think 18th century cannibals, excitable Morlocks, and blah 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 blah. Fucking clean up your titles, Rob. I know that that's been a huge trend for you, but God, they're still excessive on this project. Even his dips into sort of swamp rock, sort of boogie rock on that track isn't horrible, but man, this record still has some dumb, not exciting, dumb shit in it. Ballad of Sleazy Rider is an awful fucking tune. Shake Your Ass, Smoke Your Grass is fucking dumb. Like, not even in like a fun dumb. I mean, some may find some fun in that track, but I don't know, man. It's a track that didn't do anything for me, personally. Same with Boom Boom Boom. Tracks like that feel like Rob Zombie putting on the character of his musician character, Rob Zombie, in a way that just... it feels too meta. It feels like it's trying too hard to be meta, in like a intro of Scream 4 kind of way. You know, this record does excel in ways that his last one didn't, but his choice to double down on things that worked on the last project, as far as like and having interludes that came together well, the doubling down on having more interludes doesn't do this record any favors. I feel like if you like Rob, you've probably listened to this and you probably already like it. But if you're gonna listen to Rob Zombie, at least from like a beginner's perspective, I wouldn't start here. It's very much not that kind of record. It feels like a sort of another cog in the zombie machine. You know, in the same way that some of his films may feel like that way, to some degree, this very much feels in that same camp. It's nothing super dazzling. It's just impressive to see a dude who clearly is just on another plane of existence in his own lane still drop some tracks that hit my brain, hit my ear in a really nice way. But it's very average at the end of the day, given its good, its positives and negatives. And so I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. We'll see if that score drops throughout the year.
You won't play, you know, fun.
You know, for the first time since I've been listening to Lana Del Rey or morbidly curiously checking out her music after initially not liking her stuff, I was actually genuinely curious to hearing how this record would sound, given how much I liked Norman fucking Rockwell, that dropped last year. I was hoping she would carry some of that experimentation and maturation of her writing into a follow-up. And on Chemtrails Over the Country Club, a title that I really fucking hate, it sees her doing that in doses while also laying back into her own idiosyncrasies that I never really jived with to begin with. And also having some vocal presentation that I think is for the worse. You know, while I enjoy attributes of this project, like the sentiments on tracks like Wild at Heart, or the writing on Wild at Heart and Tulsa Jesus Freak, and how well integrated her lyrics work with the grandiosity on Breaking Up Slowly and the collaborative work on The Closer for Free, or that trip-hop breakdown on Dark But Just a Game. Tracks like the title track and its overall lyrical details see her continuing to channel that vibe, that very vintage vibe that I've never really wholly loved with Lana in her earlier work, and it feels like it hits that same core in a way that just didn't hit me all that well. I also kind of wish there was that same level of experimentation at points that was seen on Norman fucking Rockwell. While again, it's here in pockets, the album overall sits in this realm that isn't quite as memorable to me as a whole. And going back to this point, some of her vocal work is really not good in this project. I hate the whisper singing on All of White Dresses that goes on for way too fucking long and comes back on some of the hooks like on Not All Who Wander Are Lost, a track whose writing also, similarly to the title track, sits in this realm that channels a vibe that reminds me of her older work in a way that I don't enjoy whatsoever.
And that could just be the production talking, but it just stuck out like a sore fucking thumb on this project, and it was obnoxious.
I feel like she works better when she sits in her mid-range and lets her voice soar in a gratifying fashion. Or sitting, having that sort of complacency sound to her voice. It suits the writing that she's doing or the vibe that she's presenting. And while you can, again, see her trying to expand that in ways like she did on Norman fucking Rockwell, the points where she doesn't do that, or even some of those experimentations, just sit in this muddled realm of mediocrity that isn't hitting me in the same way, man. While I do think this is still better than some of her earlier work, it is not nearly as memorable or as enjoyable to me as NFR was. And I'm upset by that. I'm a little disappointed, to be honest. Not to say that I was, like, turning into a Lana Del Rey fan, but I was curious, man. It got me, her last record got me curious about her work in a way that nothing she'd done in the past had done. And while this is, again, not awful, it's nothing that I would write home about in the same way that I did NFR. And my score is going to reflect that. You know, I'm feeling like a 6 on this record. You know, while there's definitely still a lot of muddled mediocrity, there's points where it does shine in ways that I like that last record. And I want to give my props to that. It just ain't it completely, Chief. That's all.
You lift me up, yeah, and I'll be right.
You know, Justin Bieber didn't really have much of a hill to climb when it came to doing better than his dumpster fire that came out last year, Changes. You know, and what's funny is before it was sort of announced, or before I had seen that he was doing just a full-blown follow-up, I thought that tracks like Holy and Lonely were gonna be like tacked on to like a deluxe edition of Changes, because that was like a big trend last year. Artists were coming back with basically another album's worth of material and just tacking it on to like a bonus edition. So I thought all of these songs were gonna be basically made to extend the life of an incredibly shitty project. And what's funny is I didn't think that those singles were as bad as the singles or anything that I had heard from Changes. So I was like, okay, well, at least he's trying again, or at least he's pulling together, he's reining in his cheesiness in a way, in an avenue that I feel like works better. And honestly, the entire project, the project that we have now, Justice, is certainly a step above Changes, but again, like I said, that ain't saying much. It's funny that Chance the Rapper is featured on this project, because the one sort of comparison tonally I get from this project is The Big Day, but I think that because Justin Bieber is such an anti-personality by and large, at least on song, it negates any sort of the potential negative backlash, at least in the same regard that The Big Day had. You guys probably know, I don't hate The Big Day. I think it's sort of average, but I don't think it's the abomination that the internet by and large thinks it is. And Justice, I don't like as much as The Big Day, but again, it's because Justin Bieber has like zero personal presence on as a performer. You know, he's writing about stuff that he clearly cares about, but it doesn't have any lasting emotional impact on me. I do like some of the vibes on here. Like, I dig the track with Khalid a decent amount, at least the vibe of the instrumental. I don't hate Khalid, and he's fine on that track. I actually don't mind Chance on Holy. I feel like he also kind of reins in some of his sort of eccentricities that coded The Big Day, and he's kind of on an uptick anyway, with the recent track that he dropped that was fucking fire. And while I don't like Bieber's performance on Lonely, I really love that synth tone. It's got this like classic feel that I think works. And a lot of the production by and large in this project, while there's parts of it that feel like it's trying to channel, again, a very sort of contemporary edge, obviously, because he's a pop singer, it comes across a lot more gracefully on this project. There's some tracks that I don't think work. Like, I don't like Die For You with Dominic Fike. I really don't like Unstable either. I also think that the MLK stuff is a little oddly placed on this project. And there's just more, by and large, more of this project that just doesn't disgust me. I just have zero interest in it. Like, a lot of the romantic stuff, thematically reminds me of The Big Day. comes across in that same kind of cheesy, love-struck manner that I feel like loses its direction by the end of the project. But I think it's cute that he's trying, at least initially. Again, I think he gets a bit much, like on the opener, too much. Or on Deserve You. Like, it's a great 1-2 punch of unbearable cheesiness. But again, nothing on this record is like an equity or an asset. There's no yummy on this record, which alone makes it a better prospect than Changes.
I feel like the closest he comes to that is Holy, and some of the lines on Lonely maybe tread that line for some people, but as far as like getting that yummy levels of cheesiness, I could see people making the argument for Holy, but it just doesn't hit me as hard as some of the bad lines from Changes did, man.
Is it that much better? No. Am I still going to be giving it a low score? Yes. Is the hook work as obnoxious? No. Is it still anything worthwhile? Not all that much. I'm giving it a 3 out of 10. If you like standard pop music, I think you'll enjoy this. It just had very little to do outside of texturing and some features that wowed me personally. This record is one that I am incredibly excited for. Death from Above 1979, I feel like, are such an incredibly consistent rock band. You know, whether you're talking about their classic debut, You're a Woman, I'm a Machine, or their comeback records, The Physical World and Outrageous Now, that show that they still had some fire left in their veins, even after some long dormancy from each other. And even on Outrageous Now, they found ways to sort of expand that punky, dance-driven roots into something a little bigger. And I love that on this fourth record, Is for Lovers, they continue to experiment and push their sounds into different but still dance punk driven ways. I love the production on this thing. It's super abrasive. It's super, noisy in a way that I feel like benefits their small setup. Their bass on a lot of the tracks here, like the run through Modern Guy and New York City Power Elite, is so sharp. And it enhances, it even helps sort of enhance some of the dancier-driven back end, like the synthetic textures on Glass Homes. It provides this very aggressive sound that makes their setup sound even more dynamic, because that bass just shrieks on this record in a way that I feel like still slays. And the drum production on here, the drums are so fucking punchy on this record that it makes the punkier moments that much more bombastic, while keeping the grooves that are in this record's core still intact as well. Whether it is the more aggressive Free Animals dance-driven nature, or the more subdued Love Letter sound, the drums still pop and keep the groove at the forefront of that track in such a gratifying way. And I also really like how this record is split. I like the more aggressive front half that sort of bleeds away into a more groove-oriented and subdued second half. The band doesn't lose any of their luster even in those softer moments. Hell, Mean Street sees them at maybe their most loudest during the chorus or hook-driven section, while its verses are so much more subdued and minimal. It creates the grandest loud, soft dynamic I've heard in a record like this in a long fucking time, and it's really killer, man. I think that this record is incredibly tight. I like how you can even hear stuff like a Queens of the Stone Age influence on Totally Wiped Out, another rager that leads into the back half incredibly well. And I even like these sort of weirder textures on the track No War that see them delving even further into this noisier, coded atmosphere that I think works, again, incredibly well to expand their palette into more experimental for them ways. This record is incredibly tight and a great follow-up to a record that I thought immediately captured my mind in the way that I was hoping a record from this band was, but in a completely different way. I'm digging this thing a lot. Really, the only super weak point to me is the New York City Power Elite Part 2. I love Part 1 for how much of a rager it is, with a really good chorus, and again, some sharp lyricism at its core that this band typically channels incredibly well, depending on the subject matter that they're writing. But I feel like the second half just sort of whimpers away into nothingness, that I feel like could have led into the second half of the record decently if it weren't followed up by a much better track, Totally Wiped Out. You know, this record feels like it has a lot to say in a bunch of different avenues, and I feel like it definitely, from a writing perspective, still has that same sharpness that Coded Outrage is now in a way that I really, really enjoyed, while not losing sight of a good hook when they want to bring one into the fray. And I feel like even for all the noisier experimentation, the hooks when they're here still pop in the way that they did on their last couple of records. This is another great notch on their belt, if you ask me. I'm really jiving with this record, and I feel like if you like their last couple of releases, I feel like this is a good next step for them, and I feel like you might enjoy this as well, at least some of the more hook-centric, punk-leaning moments. But I'm giving this an 8. I genuinely really, really like this thing, and I'm glad to see that they're still churning out really quality records at this point in their career. Should I get out before I drown? And this next record, because apparently 2021 is the return of the duos, 68, another duo whose last album dropped in 2017, also dropped a new album this month in the form of Give One, Take One. And their last record, Two Parts Viper, was my introduction to the band, and I enjoyed their tightness, their singer's real aggressive vocal tendencies that match really well with their pounding drums and their dense guitar work. And I like that on their follow-up to that, their drum work is that much better. You know, the first leg of this record, from the knife, through What You Feed or What You Starve, the drums are just so frenzied, and they create such a tight pocket for the guitars to just rage over in the best way possible. And I feel like while there's some points where some of the self-indulgent tendencies that I had heard people talk about with their last record do feel like they sort of stand out more on this project. The points where they rein it in or create a really good groove, or even some good just drowsier laden moments like Life and Debt and The Storm, The Storm, The Storm, which has this just evolving wave of noise, come together incredibly well. I will say I feel like the album is just a tad long in the tooth. Like, I feel like it should have ended 2 or 3 songs before it actually does. I dig a decent amount of what's here. I feel like there's some moments where, again, that kind of vocal eccentricity sort of stands out in a way that I don't think is all that necessary. Like, I think Nickels and Diamonds is where it gets its most obnoxious. Like, the sort of chiming in from the vocalist while the drummer's just in this pocket feels wholly unnecessary. And there's bits of that throughout the entire project that was present on Two Parts Viper, but I feel like it's even more obnoxious on this project. And I do feel like does set it back a little bit for me. And that complaint of the record needing to end a couple tracks before it actually does extends past the record just feeling bloated. The whole pacing of this record is just all over the map, and I feel like while they were trying to do this sort of split in 3 parts structure, it doesn't wholly work because some of those sort of division tracks aren't some of the best moments on the record either. But I feel like if you still want a good at least foundation, tight sounding rock band that has, again, some good bite to their sound, when their vocalist, cuts the bullshit, he delivers a pretty good performance. And those drums, man, I really fucking love the drums on this project. I feel like you'd really enjoy yourself. It's a little bit of a letdown, given how quality I like Two Parts Viper, but it's still decent if you like heavy, aggressive rock music. And I'm going to give it a 7, just because, again, I really like the musicianship when it shines, and when the band finds its pocket and rides in it and thrives in it, it really is an energizing experience. It's just a bit much at times.
Faces down.
So I'll start off this review by saying Tomahawk, not one of my favorite Mike Patton bands. I like the first 2 records a hell of a lot, and I feel like they really had a good way of setting themselves apart sonically from some of the typical Pattonisms that may have been developing within the bands that he had been forming. But I'll be honest, their last couple of releases just never really stuck with me. Hell, I think I've only spun Oddfellows in full maybe a couple times since it was first released. And when I saw that they were doing a new record, I was far less excited than I was at the prospect of a new Mr. Bungle record. And after spinning Tonic Immobility, it feels like business as usual, for better or for worse. Sure, there are still some highlights here. I like the frenzied nature on tracks like the opener, Shh. The riff work on Predators and Scavengers has this sort of unnerving, erratic feel that feels sort of adjacent to stuff that they may have experimented with in the past. And hell, even the groove of Howley gives me some vintage, again, patent-adjacent feels on here. And out of the more ambient-driven tracks, I like the lyrical nuance in Doomsday Fatigue, and I feel like Tattoo Zero has a good balance of some of the sonic characteristics the record's going for. The lead riff in that song fucking slays, and I feel like the points where Patton's vocal delivery gets very frenzied suits the track incredibly well. But by and large, I think a lot of this record is very forgettable. I think that a lot of the tail end of the record is super flaccid in a way that may suit the album cover, but doesn't evoke the same level of heaviness or experimentation that I feel like this band was thriving in within their first couple of releases. And again, it's not to say that I was expecting greatness from this project, but the points where this does shine do stick out like a sore thumb amidst the rest of what this record has to offer. I mean, I feel like if you enjoy this band, you may like some of the points I referenced, along with some of the tracks that sound more like typical things in their style, like Fatback or Business Casual, which Business Casual has that sort of counterculture, postmodern writing style that I feel like suits Patton's personality as a singer, but that track in particular feels like he's sort of falling back on old trends in a way that isn't all that fun to listen to. I don't know. This record was really nothing super dazzling by and large, but I at least had some stuff that I enjoyed a lot out of it, which is something I would have hoped to expect, given even if I don't love this band as much as, say, like Fantomas or Faith No More. I still was hoping to find some level of deep enjoyment from this project, because I like the members of this band, and I like some of the components that this band had fired off with in the past. But as for this record, I'm feeling a 5. It's nothing super dazzling. It's nothing super incredible. It's pretty average by and large. I was really excited to see that Xiu Xiu announced a new record, though, given I'm a newer fan of this project's output. I like To Girl with a Basket of Fruit a lot, and I dig the Twin Peaks stuff, and when looking at the track listing, I was even more curious, given that this seemed to be a much more collaboratively driven experience. And while I expected some of that eccentric nuance or that zany style that coded Girl with a Basket of Fruit to be reined in a little bit, I wasn't expecting it to be done to such a heavy degree. Now, there is still some of that oddball nature or some of that really abrasive touch that I enjoyed from the last project, like on some of the more eccentric percussion work on Goodbye for Good, or the vocal delivery on Rumpus Room, or even a lot of the electronic texturing and noisiness that creeps in on It Bothers Me All the Time. That track, in general, sounds the most like what I would expect from Xiu Xiu up to this point. But by and large, this record scales it back into a much more softer realm, and I don't necessarily hate that, but I will say some of the more pulled back moments lead to just a much more duller presentation that I don't think is as rewarding of an experience to revisit. I like some of the vocal work on the opener, Sad Mescalita with Sharon Van Etten. I dig the texturing that creeps up on I Cannot Resist, Fuzz Gong Fight, and I Dreamt of Someone Else Entirely. And the bombast on the title track and the Grifters is kind of neat, but even those tracks, I just don't find myself re-spinning as much. I think it's cool to have this sort of spoken word ambient style, and I don't feel like that would necessarily be too adjacent from... Bless you. I don't think that would be too adjacent necessarily, given I'm still kind of a newbie to this group's output. And maybe it's because I walked into this record with expectations that weren't necessarily supposed to be the same as they were for the last project, because again, I'm still new to this group, so it could just be me not necessarily understanding that this group just does this level of experimenting, which is very respectable and very commendable. Again, I just didn't think it was as wowing this time around, outside of the pockets that I did enjoy. It is a solid record. It's not necessarily anything near the worst of my year, but given how much I liked the previous output from this group, I personally was a little let down by this experience. I'm still giving it an average score because I do think it's solid, and I do feel like some of the texturing is really admirable. And again, the collaborations in some points come together in some meaningful ways, or in some well-constructed ways, personally. So I'm giving it a 6. It's nothing super dazzling and wowing, but it is still kind of a solid thing that I've checked out this year. Now, the last record I listened to this month was done so at the heavy request of my buddy John, the new Citizen project, Life in Your Glass World. And I'm not a foreign listener to Citizen. I listened to their last record, As You Please, around the time that it came out, and I really enjoyed it. And I didn't know they were dropping a new record, but after spinning Life in Your Glass World, I gotta say, I'm really digging the sounds on this project a hell of a lot. This group is definitely adapting much more of a dance punk driven atmosphere, and in some instances they even integrate some chiptune influence, like on the breakdown of Fight Beat. But I like at its core this record's ability to have a danceable groove with some really good harnessing of melody and catchy songwriting, with some still emotional resonance at its core. I enjoy that this record sort of throttles off on an incredibly kinetic foot with Dance Dance Approximately that doesn't really let up for a couple of tracks until the beautiful Blue Sunday comes into fray, where it really showcases the band's ability to utilize their melody incredibly well and have some good hook work in there as well. I also enjoy a lot of the lyrical allusions painted on tracks like Thin Air, Glass World, and on the incredible closer Edge of the World. I think that this project is incredibly tight. So very tight. And again, I like the moments where it gets a little noisy and they flourish some good aggression in there. Like on the breakdown of, like I said, Fight Beat, on the pounding drums of I Want to Kill You, Pedestal, and Call Your Bluff. And again, just some really tight riff-working guitar work also coded throughout this entire project. I feel like if you enjoy dance punk in the vein of like second album era Block Party, or maybe even Room on Fire era Strokes, or You Only Live Once era Strokes, you'll enjoy a lot of what this record has going on sonically. It's a tight release that I feel like I'll be spinning more and more as the year goes on when I'm looking for just some good bops to dance to, or just have some good fun buoyant rock tracks in general. You know, I feel like this is a really great release that I'm happy that I checked out, and I like, again, the use of good imagery and lyricism in tandem with that tight, bright, energetic core. I feel like it creates a good dynamic with the band sonically that I feel like the band pulls off incredibly well. I don't know, I really enjoyed this. This is a pleasant rock album to check out that dropped this year, and I feel like it's definitely worth your time if you're looking for something to spin. I'm feeling like 8 on this record. I think it's really, really good. I feel like if you enjoy some of the other records that I've talked about this month from maybe more prolific acts or longer standing acts like Death from Above, and you want something not quite as aggressive but still kinetically driven, check out the Citizen record. It's absolutely worth your time. And that's going to be my listening log update for the month. Did you like it? Did you not? Let me know in those comments down below. If you did like it, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. If there's a record you would like for me to talk about in future listening log updates, or you want to see what's on my radar, the listening log is linked in the description, and you can request albums in the comments down below. Special thanks to my patrons. If you want to join their ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community, it's linked in the description. I'm going to get out of here, though. I've been Viral Rack. You guys are good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day. Thank you so very much for watching this video.
Thank you.